Look what I found, Gina.
Oh, that's perfect. And made in 1811. That will look super on the bed.
Imagine, hidden away for all these years and we didn't even know it existed. What does the paperwork say?
Quilt, circa 1811, donated by the Neal family in 1970.
Just look at the material, the colours, the delicate stitching. It's simply beautiful.
But look here, some historical information too, Marjorie. It's made by 11-year-old Mary Garner in Wensleydale, Yorkshire, for her trousseau while she was working at the big house. Perhaps some of the material came from there.
Oh, what a super find. We must unwrap it carefully. Oh!
Oh my goodness! Oh my dear life, what on earth?
A large pair of Victorian gentlemen's underpants dropped from the quilt's folds. Upon them were embroidered in gold thread these words: "There either is or is not. That's the way things are. The colour of the day. The way it felt to be a child. The salt water on your sunburnt legs. Sometimes the water is yellow. Sometimes it's red. But what colour it may be in memory depends on the day." I'm not going to tell you the story the way it happened. I'm going to tell it the way I remember it.
Around the same time, at the John Pounds Memorial Church in the Old High Street, a tourist was squinting at the figures in the reproduction of John Pounds' workshop, wondering at the sight of a disfigured cobbler surrounded by street urchins. "I don't get it," the tourist shrugged. "What's the big deal?" "Well," said the guide, "what you are looking at is one of the first ever free schools for the poor. John Pounds would encourage young children to come to his workshop by offering them hot baked potatoes. And then he would teach them reading and writing. This inspired the ragged schools, which then led to free education for all." "Sounds dumb," said the tourist. "Hey, how come his tie sparkling like that?" The guide frowned. John Pounds' necktie was white. With gold lettering? That was all wrong. Somebody must have been interfering and added the tie when no one was looking. She went to remove it and saw that the gold lettering made up a phrase: "A very little key will open a very heavy door." "That's dumb too," said the tourist. "He doesn't have a key." "It's a metaphor," said the guide. "A what?" "It means a little education can go a long, long way." Very appropriate. "Dumb," the tourist repeated with a shrug. He took his wife's arm. "Come on, let's get a burger." "For your information," the guide called after them, "it's a quote from Dickens. Charles Dickens and John Pounds are Portsmouth's best-loved sons." But they were already gone.
The Winchester Public House had all the charm of a World War II ARP post. Mine host would have liked to have been known as a congenial fellow, but sadly his penchant for rabbit pie and the fact that decreasing numbers of aforesaid lived in small hutches in the beer garden rather detracted from that ambition. A sign above the entrance read, "Benjamin L. Thackeray, proprietor, licensed purveyor of fine wines and spirits, head brewer, Buckland Brewery, importer of finest Jamaican rum, pigs slaughtered by appointment, no tick," leading one to conclude the providence of numerous red stains which decorated the bar area. The focal point of the snug was a fireplace, adorned with bric-a-brac salvaged from the parts of Portsmouth that Hitler's Luftwaffe had kindly left behind. Over the chimney breast was hung an ARP helmet, surrounded by black and white photographs depicting Portsmouth and Southsea in halcyon days of yore. Settled with a pint of what purported to be hobgoblin, Cliff Garrett unfolded his newspaper with a view to battling the day's crossword. No sooner had he done so, his focus was ruined by the dramatic entrance of two elderly gentlemen. One almost leapt across the divide between door and bar in his eagerness to acquire a pint. His companion shuffled along behind in an almost reverential manner. "Evening, George. Evening, Sid. The usual?" Mine host was at his congenial best. The more agile of the two hit the bar. The more infirm gentleman staggered towards the table. The effort caused the elderly fellow to cough violently. "Coffee up, George, might be a gold watch." George spluttered to a halt, aided by a large swig of Pompey Pride, followed by the inevitable belch. Both sat drinking in silence, yet one felt as though they were conversing. Sid would raise his glass, look over at his companion, take a drink, place the glass on the table, lean back in his chair and nod in George's direction. The latter would then perform a similar action, a ritual that continued until the glasses were drained. More beer was purchased and the ritual continued until George's nod was directed at the fireplace. Sid looked askance, thrown out of kilter by the change of custom.
That's where they found it.
George returned to the beer ritual. Some minutes later, Sid's gaze fell upon the fireplace.
What?
George remained silent for a while before leaning forward, looking around furtively, then whispering the words,
The waistcoat.
The ritual continued for a few moments.
Well,
Reckon that dodgy mush who done over the chiropodist in New Road must have dropped it.
you reckon? So, who was that then?
The bloke that got collared by two chimps outside here last week. That waistcoat must have been in the bag he chawed off Mr. Pearson.
What? He got pinched by two chimps? Two monkeys?
Chimps, you pranet! Them community police officers, completely hopeless in most police situations.
So this mush got nicked then?
No, Sid, they just went, sorry mate, have a nice day. Of course it was bloody nicked, you didn't know.
Well, where's the waistcoat now then? Did Mr. Parsons ever say it was his?
Who's he?
Mr. Parsons, the chiropodist.
His name's Pearson. Gordon Bennett, Sid. What are you like? Anyway, Mr. Pearson ain't going to admit he collects old clothes, is he? Wouldn't look good for the punters.
Suppose not.
Anyway, look around. Do you really think some posh mush like Mr. Pearson would come in here looking for his gear? Nah. Paul puts it on the mantelpiece.
Well, it ain't there now.
I can see that, you do not. It got thieved, didn't it?
Who by? Mr. Parsons?
Oh, God give me strength. You can't thieve your own bloody stuff, can you? Anyway, it's gone, and the long and the short of it's that Paul don't mind really because it was a bit naff. I mean, who'd wear a white waistcoat unless you was off to some fancy wedding?
White?
White as a sheet of paper, which was funny, because it had writing on it. Fancy writing, which is no use round here, because people can't read. Can they, Sid?
Wonder why it had writing on it and why anyone would thieve it.
Certainly not, because of what it said.
What's that then?
It said, My dear, if you could give me a cup of tea to clear my muddle of a head, I should better understand your affairs.
What a load of old cobblers. Why would they nick it then?
It wasn't because of what the word said, it's because of what the word was.
Was?
Was. Them words were stitched in with gold thread. Real gold. Them words might have been a load of cobblers, but they was worth their weight, wasn't they?
Gold. Cliff Garrett sniggered to himself, looked lovingly at the carpet bag by his side, and returned to his long neglected crossword.
Best foot forward, Liz Neal, social correspondent. Fratton Park, Monday, 5 p.m. During a training session for the Pompey youth team, their star striker, Arthur Dodger Ball, 11, popped back to the dressing room for a well-earned snack. Imagine his surprise when he found a handmade Victorian boot in his locker, complete with a gold inscription. Our roving reporter, Liz Neal, interviewed Dodger at his grandmother's flat in Nickleby House. He said, "Well, you don't find that sort of thing every day, do you? My nan wants it as a doorstop, if Curly Ash don't want it." His mother, Nancy, 26, said, "I'm very proud of my boy. I always knew he was clever. I reckon when he's finished his football career, he'll be on that Antiques Roadshow." The inscription was, "Reflect upon your present blessings, of which every man has many, not on your past misfortunes, of which all men have some." Perhaps things are looking up for fans and players alike at Fratton Park.
During the months of October to March, South Sea seafront transforms itself into a dog walker's paradise. Pooches of every description, along with owners of lesser description, promenade along the promenade and play fetch along the stony shoreline. Looking on is the newly tarted up pyramids, filled with colourful flumes and sauna facilities for the body-conscious brethren of Portsmouth. During the months of March to October, however, dogs and owners are restricted to the eastern end of the beach. The extremities of the seasons are somewhat pleasanter than the middle months, when dog owners have to delve their dogs from sniffing around the bath towels of the nudists who come out in force at the first glimpse of sun. The joggers jog and huff and puff past walkers taking it all in their stride. The promenade is a long Sunday afternoon of a walk, with time and tide on your side. A twitter of birds zig across the shingle, then zag into the grass, panicked. Clouds loom over the opposite peninsula like ghoulish onlookers. A lady, wearing a large, ornate hat, has a dog leash with no dog attached. She is out of breath also.
"Oh, do catch him, please. Do catch him. He's such a naughty boy. He's going to run into the sea and then he's done for. He can't swim, but he doesn't know it. Please catch him, somebody."
The dog is running them a merry dance. One of the joggers slips on some seaweed, his scrawny bottom getting the worst of the shingle. His bad language is carried out of earshot by a censorious sea breeze. Big Hat Lady has sculpted hair and debonair footwear. Her nails are manicured blood spots against the grey coastal backdrop. She is sorry she let her dog off the leash.
"Jip!"
Jip is the love of her life. She had another love once, but... "Stupid dog," a walker responds, running after the chihuahua. In its mouth is a soggy-looking sock. It is white, with gold letters stitched into it. The gold glints in the afternoon sun, dazzling. The jogger catches the end of the sock, and after a short game of tug-of-war, manages to drag both dog and sock back to the agitated lady.
"Jippy! How could you be such a naughty boy?"
So keen to reassure her lapdog, she hasn't the time to thank the man for his help, or take interest in the golden stitching. She cradles Jip like a girl hugging a doll, smothering his head in kisses.
"Oh, my wounded little soldier boy, you must be brave for Mummy."
The dog whines, holding up its limp paw like an injured limb.
"If Jippy stays brave, then we'll have some sweeties for a good boy, won't we?"
Jip licks the lady's face.
That's right, my little cootie coo. Dora loves you and will nurse you back to health.
She looks up at the jogger.
Jippy's got a special healing blanket sprinkled with essential oil. Haven't you, Jippy?
She gives the dog another snog. The dog licks her nose. Anyone would think the dog had been lost for a month. What do the words say? Asks the jogger.
What?
The words. The words.
Oh. Can you read what it says, little Jippy?
Jip whimpers at his own illiteracy as the jogger holds up the sock. It reads, "Procrastination is the thief of time. Collar him."
The following morning, Cliff Darrett took a furtive hobble along Loxway Road to J.G. Riley, newsagent. Loxway Road used to be called Asylum Road because of the hospital. Cliff hated walking past the old hospital. Extreme circumstances lead to extreme responses, he thought to himself. I'm as natural as the next man and as guilt-free. Having purchased his daily copy of the News, a Bible for every self-respecting Portsmouthian, he lurched towards Milton Locks, where he sat facing the wonderful vista that is Langstone Harbour, and proceeded to scan the paper for anything of interest. His lizard eyes lit upon an article, "Collector seeks suit of clothes." Apparently, a number of pieces of antique clothing had been found in various unusual places around the city, all embroidered with gold lettering, and the finders were being encouraged to take theirs along to an event in Victoria Park for possible identification and authentication. Were these like his acquisition, he wondered? Did they too have some important inscribed on them? Were they part of a larger mystery? The article was accompanied by an advert. "Curly Ash, cash my name, cash my game. Have you got any unwanted clothing? Wanted, clothes with logos or slogans, any size, shape and description. We pay cash. Want to know more? Come and see us at Victoria Park on February the 7th. Closing at 8:12 precisely. You've got to be in it to win it."
Pearl Stitch and her team of guerrilla knitters were beavering away furiously at their latest project to brighten up the city of Portsmouth. Most of the wool they used had been generously donated by the city's knitting fraternity. Scraps of this and oddballs of that, but there was just that one ball missing to complete the project, a ball of gold thread. One of the few remaining shops that sold wool and haberdashery was Debenhams of Southsea, so a knitter was dispatched to make the purchase. The team had heard of the coming spectacle in Victoria Park and decided there would be a good place to site some of their work. Cover a tree trunk here, a bench there. Aaron Cable, one of their few male knitters, even set about knitting a hat for the greenhouse. The knitter sent to Debenhams was taking a while, too long. Something must have happened. The group began to worry.
Debenhams department store in Southsea Precinct was a genteel old lady of a shop. Born in the early part of the last century, she was venerable, little shabby, but valiantly keeping up. Evidently she had been a lady of quality. Her structure was on a grand scale. Windows of large plate glass displaying her wares to advantage. Her interior still reflected her lineage, spacious, high-ceilinged, all 3 floors. Alas, she was developing little failings here and there. Her fabric had lost its richness. Her decorativeness had begun to show cracks. Her people, shop staff, were no longer trimly dressed assistants with starched collars and neat aprons with their "Yes, mums," and "Right away, sirs." Long gone, the mutton chop whiskers and bonnets of Edwardian days. The new staff was a different type. One she did not understand or particularly care for. For instance, take the young girl in the ladies' fashion department. or as it used to be known, modes for ladies. So much nicer. Look at her operating the cash register, if the bleeping flashing machine could be so described. She was not even a lady of English birth, not remotely the young shop miss of yesteryear in her garish headscarf and long foreign draperies. No, yes, ma'am, for her. Instead, have a nice day, as the customer pays by a card. What was that about the old shop did not know. But in spite of all this modernity, of the all-enveloping headscarf and scandalously casual chatting, the young girl somehow reminded the old shop of people she recognised from earlier times. She acknowledged that the girl had a modest and sweet, natural demeanour in her duties. See how different she was to the others in the shop. Pretty felt different from them too. Perhaps she too belonged to an older, slower way of life. Even her clothes, though odd and exotic, bangles on her arms and rings on her fingers, reminded one of an earlier age. Priti Patel was a modern young Muslim girl. Oh, she wore the traditional dress required of a modest young girl and went to the mosque every week. But people shook their heads when discussing her future. Her father thought she read too much, and also the wrong things. Women's magazines and such. Terrible influence. Priti really wanted to please everybody, her family, her friends, but also the people she saw every day at work. She had lost some of her shyness when she realised she enjoyed the banter of the other staff. She loved dealing with customers, helping them find what they wanted. She used her neat efficiency and kindness to great effect. Her goal was to try and gain Employee of the Month status. This would please everyone, she thought. Her parents would feel pride in their daughter's achievement, and her colleagues would respect her more. So, on the lookout for any extra help she could give, she smiled at her customers, asked interesting questions, and volunteered to tidy up the stockroom. But when a rather posh customer lost her purse in the shop and accused a small boy of the deed, she didn't know what to do. What was right? The old shop sighed to herself. She'd seen things like this before. She already knew that the situation was beyond the grasp of most of the people there. If only they could see below the surface like she had learned to do. Nothing was as it seemed. She wanted to say, talk to them both and listen. Give them a cup of tea. Tea is a great calmer of the mind, especially if it's made properly and served in a china teapot. Something stirred in the fabric of the old shop. A tremble, a drizzle of plaster from the ceiling. It landed on Priti's arm. She looked at it. Was the old shop falling down? Everyone was gathered around the posh lady and her diminutive assailant. Posh lady somewhat tweedy, with a smart crocodile handbag on her shoulder. The boy, an undergrown urchin in tatty shorts and a too small t-shirt emblazoned with the slogan, "Just do it." Posh lady wasn't even accusing the little chap directly.
I think he might have taken the purse for a dare. What do you think, Jip? And if that is so, he can return it here and now, and no more will be said. Will it, Jip?
She seemed to be talking to her handbag. He stood there, hands in rather large pockets, and coolly denied the offence. She grew more insistent.
Doesn't the naughty boy know it's wrong to steal? Where has he hidden it? Where are his parents?
I don't know nothing about it. My mum and dad aren't here, and if they were, they'd tell you where to go.
Cheeky little sod, exclaimed Tracy, the Clinique salesgirl. You'd better do as you're told, or we'll ring the police to take you away. Unimpressed, the little chap stuck out his tongue and gave a two-fingered salute. The security guard and the storeman leapt upon him and pinned him against the wall. He yelled. Ah! The posh lady screamed, and Tracy dropped her makeup case, scattering lipsticks all over the counter. Her language was not very ladylike. Priti wanted to hold her hands over her ears. The pickpocket wriggled out of the grasp of the two men and made a dash for it. Now the old shop was properly horrified by the complete descent into chaos, with her staff racing past customers in mad pursuit of the wrongdoer. Carefully stacked boxes tumbled onto the floor, a supercilious mannequin decked in Burberry span round dizzily on her plinth, as a display of shirts collapsed like a house of cards. No one had enjoyed themselves so much in years. Pretty did not follow the crowd. You'd be like a dog hunting a fox. She hung back, keeping a watch on the tills and picking up some of the fallen display. On the counter she noticed an envelope addressed to her. She began to open it, but out of the corner of her eye she glimpsed a small figure strolling out of a lift. The clever little thief had outwitted everyone by leading them upstairs and then calmly taking the lift back down. Tucking the envelope in her pocket, she ducked behind the counter and peeped out at his progress. He was heading through the door that led to the basement. Carefully locking the tills first, she knew it was up to her to follow him. Down the steps they went, the pursued and the pursuer. She had never liked the basement. It was dark and musty, another world. Cobwebs swept across her face and dust flew up her nose. At the bottom of the stairs were rows of shelves piled up with boxes, large and small. Old mannequins lolled against the walls, looking eerily like people. It didn't help that the lighting was so poor. Usually quite brave, she was unnerved. Where had he gone? A hand touched her. She jumped in shock.
Blimey, you're a scaredy cat, ain't you? What's up with you?
The pursued and the pursuer faced each other. In one hand he held the lady's purse, and in the other a strangely shaped object. She peered at it in the gloom. It looked grotesque, twisted and strange. She opened her mouth to reply, but a scuffling noise overhead and voices alerted her that people were coming down the stairs. Instinctively they both hid behind some shelves. Where Preeti hid was uncertain even to her. As the voices grew louder, they pushed further and further into the basement, stepping over truly ancient stock, a cluttered paraphernalia of top hats, ebony canes, periwigs, snuff boxes, saddles, tins of boot blacking, whalebone corsets, toy soldiers and china dolls. The voices died away. They stopped their headlong flight and gazed at each other. They were in the heart of this cavern, buried alive in the past.
Well, boy?
Preeti tried to speak sternly, but her speech was hesitant.
See what a mess you've made of things. We're now stuck down here. What made you steal things from people?
Trying to look cool but failing, the boy said sulkily,
Nothing to do with you. You don't need any money. My family are always skint, and I have to help out. That posh lady will never miss that bit of money in her purse, and it means decent food for us.
Can't your father get a better paid job? It's always wrong to steal.
My dad's not around anymore, and my mum's on benefit. Don't go far, but you needn't feel sorry for me. I'm okay with it, as long as I get enough to eat most days.
Preeti had never met anyone in this area who didn't have enough to eat.
Are there many in your situation, boy?
I'm not boy, I'm Connor, and yes, there's a few. My cousin Shane's family are always looking for ways to make more money. My uncle Terry finds things to sell.
He winked at her to imply his uncle probably did not find these objects legitimately.
Anyway, why did you hide from the posh shop folk? You haven't done nothing. I think you are nice, miss.
He added with a cheeky smile. Preeti tried to look disapproving. She remembered the gruesome bone he'd held in his other hand. How could she have forgotten it? She stared at it in horror. It had an inhuman look about it.
Horrible, isn't it, miss? I grabbed it from a shelf when I heard you creeping up on me. I thought you was one of those big men coming to beat me up. What is it, anyway?
Peering more closely, she saw it was a white walking stick, with a golden lion's head for a handle. The fangs bared in the act of growling made the stick look barbaric, yet beautiful.
Here, miss, there's some gold writing on it.
Young Connor remembered he had a lighter in his pocket. In the faint flickering light they read,
Virtue shows quite as well in rags and patches as she does in purple and fine linen.
Preeti was beginning to feel strange, like she might faint. Here she was, buried below the ground with the peculiar little boy and this occult-like object. What would her parents think? It It was almost funny, like being in one of those scary movies she watched, behind her hands.
Say, miss, can you see a door over there? It's probably a way out of here. I'm gonna see.
He dashed off. Stumbling after him, she just had time to squeeze through the door. It led to a dark, musty-smelling tunnel.
Tom Howers, a newly qualified teacher at Charles Dickens School, was out on his first school trip, taking children around the city, places where Dickens would have walked. The children had been doing a project on Dickens. Tom loved history. Approaching the garrison church and the site of the old barracks, Tom reminded the children that Dickens, as a boy, watched soldiers marching in the square. When Dickens came to Portsmouth as a young man, he walked down the High Street, just as they'd done, only then the street was very different. The children were more interested in the street smells of the time than the history. There was no plumbing, waste of all sorts could be thrown on the streets. "People do that now, sir," said one boy. The girls squealed at the thought of the chamber pots. They admired the statue of Nelson, not to be overlooked even though he was not of the period. "Why has Nelson got that funny hat?" said one child. Tom started to explain. Then, taking a closer look, he saw it was made of cloth and embroidered with gold writing. Reaching for the hat, he read, "There is wisdom of the head, and there is wisdom of the heart." The words of Dickens. Tom looked around at the children skipping around the base of the statue and smiled.
Cliff Garrett slammed the door of his council flat in Craswell Street. In his former life, he'd been used to better circumstances. He owned a profitable business and lived in a 3-storey townhouse in Kirby Road. Then tragedy struck. The recession put a stop to everything. It had been almost as if he was being punished for... No, he was worth 20 of those who lived around here. He eyed Australia close. High up, music spilled into the sunlight, a steady thumping sound as if someone was systematically dismantling a wall. Thud, 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 each drum noise representing nails attaching a lid to a coffin. Cliff Garrett walked towards Tesco's at Commercial Road. There was no rush. His time was his own. No work to do. 63 years old. All he had to do was join the queue, answer questions and sign on. Still, he had to pass the shop entrance. Yes, he could have detoured, but he had a clinical fascination as to how his neighbours lived. Here he could experience it in detail. The litter and the rubbish gave him a sign that he was almost there. People of some kind, the kind Garrett reckoned you only find in troubled inner city areas, thronged the doorway. Their children used the 50p rides as climbing frames. The hall-like entrance echoes the screams of children and the shouts of adults as if it was a Roman amphitheatre witnessing the slaughter of Christians. Blood was spilt in ancient times. Now splatters of coke, ash, half-eaten pies are squelched onto the pavement by trainers worn by the great proletariat of Portsmouth. He could see young mothers with exposed, pendulous abdomens yelling into their mobiles, one hand on the phone held to an ear, the other on the pushchair with a petulant, screaming child strapped in. Language was rife. Voices grew louder and louder, like a competition. The cacophony melted into a pot of verbal noise, a unique demonstration of the Portsmouth twang. Cliff pitied the children. They had no hope, like their parents, delivered a life of ineptitude and downward spiral. But what of his own life? Had he not reached a lowly depth? Perhaps. His work was over. He could never recover his former life and status, not by straightforward means anyway. Striding absent-mindedly, he accidentally struck the wheel of a pushchair. The child in the chair wailed. The mother wailed even louder.
You old git, what do you think you're doing? Shut it, Shane. Oi, you bleeding blind or something?
Yes, I am, actually. Cliff Garrett sneered, staring into her eyes defiantly, but the mum was blind to his sarcasm.
Mum, see this?
Cliff was instantly forgotten.
Mum, what's this? Where did you get that from? I found it by the bin.
The scruffy boy wore an enormous grin. With outstretched arms he proudly gave the object, loosely wrapped in old newspaper, to his mother. As she peeled the paper away, she could see that it was something strange, a neatly folded cloth with writing in gold. Cliff looked on. Quickly turning away, he smiled and thought, I'll have that.
All the world's a stage. John Pearson, arts correspondent. Yesterday at the new Theatre Royal in Guildhall Walk, a swan song was revealed. As part of the theatre's major refurbishment, workers in the basement unearthed an unusual find. Excavating 3 feet down, the crew discovered a hoard of buttons, each inlaid with a golden letter. We weren't expecting anything like this, confessed Vic Bryant, 52, a worker for Sandalwood and Sons. At first I thought they were pebbles. It was only after buffing one I realised they were old buttons. Dr. Alexander Larson of Portsmouth University, a leading expert in archaeology, stated, "This is a fine example of a button circa the 1800s. The Theatre Royal was built during the Victorian era. One can only assume they were placed here deliberately." The buttons were laced together by gold thread, and when the letter of each button was read in order, the message read, "Poetry makes of life what lights and music do the stage."
Stella huffed as she lifted the supermarket bags and deposited them on the kitchen table.
Terry, get down this shopping.
What about the magic vest?
Oh, there. Weird. Don't know what to do about it. Have a look.
Stella placed the newspaper on the table. She peeled back the paper and smoothed it flat. The family gathered round and all eyes stared at the exposed article. Stella, what's that with her? You should have left it where you found it. Where did you find it?
I didn't. Shane did. Said he found it by being at Tesco's.
It's got gold all over it. Must be worth something. Stella had no idea what to do. After all, it was just someone's old vest. It intrigued her. A golden vest found by a rubbish bin next to Tesco's. Snog, marry, avoid. Stella felt that the words were significant, but why? Shane held his index finger beneath each letter to try and read the words. Oi! Terry gave him a slap. Don't touch it, you'll get germs. Shane ignored him and read out carefully.
Well, there is infection in disease and sorrow. There is nothing in the world so irresistibly contagious as laughter and good humour. Bloody rubbish! What kind of weirdo print that on a vest?
Maybe we can get a few bob for it off the Rag and Bone Man.
Mick the Mint, Commercial Road's mobile butcher, was setting up for the day. He picked up an apron. Hang on a minute. His gaze fell upon not a blood-stained striped butcher's apron, but a leather apron more suited to a cobbler. The apron was emblazoned with gold lettering which read, "Cheerfulness and contentment are great beautifiers, and are famous preservers of good looks." Mick scratched his head. Must be I've still got a good head of hair. Then he remembered the bill put out by Kearney Ash's boys and began to put two and two together. Mick came up with a plan. Instead of meeting the boys at the George after work, he would take the apron to Curly and see what he made of it. But first, let's hang the apron on the hook outside the van so it won't get no bloodstains on that lovely gold lettering.
Davina Weeks was dating for the first time since her husband's death. She was meeting her date at Hort Street under the blue Dickens plaque. Feeling nervous, Davina was just about to walk away, flee. Composing in her head a note of apology to Rob Ratchett, her date. When he arrived, big smile on his face, and big relief, taller than her. "This pub looks good," he said. "Shall we go in?" Drink in hand, they walked to the back of the George. What can we talk about? She showed him the old well and told him the pub history, how they found the well, the stories that someone was drowned in it, and how it was later covered over until the renovations in the 1980s. Looking down into its blackness, they imagined a body falling, being pushed into the well. Rob said with a shudder, "I think I can see some clothing down there, and it doesn't look modern." Half an hour later, the landlord had fished out a pair of long johns. The gold writing glistened as they were stretched out, drying before the fire. The most important thing in life is to stop saying, "I wish," and start saying, "I will." Consider nothing impossible, then treat possibilities as probabilities. As Davina read the words, she realised Rob's fingers had curled around hers, and the touch of his skin felt right.
Come on, you lot, we've got to do the meat shopping.
Terry was worried about money. Benefits don't last long. He was thinking of his drinking fund.
Get a move on, both of you. Tell you got some money?
No, I ain't got nothing.
You bleeding liar. You got a bunch in your pocket, all right. If you want food on the table tonight, hand it over. I don't want you spending that down the Painter's Arms. Give some cash.
Terry tossed £20 on the table.
Oh, give something, you tell. Come on, we can get our meat from the mobile. Mick the meat.
His stuff is crap. No God knows where he gets it from. They set off. As they neared the mobile meat shop, Stella saw the old bloke that kicked the buggy some days ago.
Here, look at that git. He's the one kicked Harry's buggy.
Do you want to sort him out?
Hang on, what's he up to?
The door to the mobile stall opened. Mick the Meat hung his blood-smeared butcher's apron on a hook to dry. Stella and Terry watched as the crooked-looking man tiptoed behind Mick the Meat and surreptitiously lifted the other apron from its hook. As the man held it up to the sun, Stella could make out gold letters shining brightly.
Just like my old man's vest, she muttered.
The letters spelt out, "Take nothing on its looks. Take everything on evidence. There's no better rule." Cliff Garrett stuffed the apron into his carpet bag and made off into the crowded pedestrian precinct of Commercial Road. Stella frowned.
Looks, evidence. Here, he's just nicked Mick the Meat's apron. Let's get after him.
Stell, you're mad. What do you think you're doing? He's probably a loony.
You coming or what?
Stella pushed the buggy with vigour. She was determined not to let the thief out of her sight. What are we going to do, Stell? Nick it for ourselves?
To say the old Guild Hall is a grand building is not to pay it due respect. It is splendiferous, with an opposing front, large doors, pillars and a sweep of steps. This array is topped by gargantuan stone lions, sitting hungrily on guard, ready to pounce on mere mortals who, without due respect, climb not just the steps, but their backs, their heads. If stone could turn to flesh, they'd be sent screaming into oblivion for daring to mess with the mighty. When the city is pumped up with pomp, a red carpet is flung down the middle portion of the array, and important, successful, benevolent persons climb the crimson staircase under Victoria's disdainful gaze. At the top, many faces match the carpet, wheezing before disappearing to be lauded, wined and dined at tables groaning under crystal and silver, only taken out of the cabinets for important functions. Fed food cooked downstairs, grown cold on its journey upward to the banqueting hall. The large windows look down on all this in bored acceptance. They know what's on the inside. They see the shabby bits, unnoticed by those reflected in their own grandeur. We are at the top, they say. At the very top, the bell tower, sadly silenced now, the truly glorious bells, until recently filling the square and surround with music, chiming away the hours and days. Will no one restore them to their former grandeur? The clock face smiles quietly, knowing that it is he that ticks the minutes away. The people in the square pay little attention, sometimes glancing up and wondering what's happening. On the other corner, a large screen broadcasts facts we didn't know we wanted to know, followed by the weather.
The square tower stands at the old fortifications of Battery Row, ancient brickwork rooted sturdily into cobbled-together streets. Sailors were press-ganged here, waving distance of the round tower. Between the two towers is what is known as the hot walls, because people used to do their washing in the sea and hung it out to dry on the hot brick, protected from the wind. On the cobbles, a panicking tween tossed up her bag of chips, mobbed by a press gang of seagulls. The cobbles were picked dry like bones. But the biggest, fiercest, ugliest gull of all ignored this melee. Perched atop the round tower, it tipped back its head, opened its side of the beak, and crowed to the gods. Then it lowered its beak to the roof and pecked, neat, sharp. Flapping upwards towards the square tower, it gripped something in its beak. It dropped the object. Too hot to hold? It fell, wafting in through an open window. A sock, snatched from where it lay drying on the hot wall. Steve, the manager, in his office, glanced up from his work. What the Dickens? The sock was white, gold lettering. Steve peered, squinted, and read. Happiness is a gift, and the trick is not to expect it, but to delight in it when it comes. Steve gave a whoop and twirled the sock round his head.
In the council offices, opposite the Guildhall, Hilary Hours checked her watch again. She still had mountains of paperwork to finish and a large queue in front of her. Irritated people, resigned people, noisy people, some able to state their needs clearly, some struggling even to speak. Hilary herself was stressed. She would have to use her lunch hour to ensure her mum had eaten the dinner that Hilary had left her, rather than the chocolate she liked to eat. Her mother, Mrs. Weeks, had the signs of dementia, which, with diabetes, made it increasingly difficult for Hilary to keep her eating a healthy diet. The children had to hide their sweets away, so their gran didn't help herself while they were at school. The person they loved and looked up to was gradually changing into a cantankerous, helpless old lady. Hilary had a brother, Fred, and sister Davina, both kind people. She must try to get them to help. Hilary was dragged back into the moment. The person in front of her was complaining. She was sure she was paying too much council tax. Several mobile phones started ringing. People shouted into their phones. complaining about their long wait. If Hilary were to close her desk now, there would be a riot. Lizzie, who should have taken over by now, was late as usual. Finally, Lizzie arrived, and Hilary rushed off, glancing up at the Guildhall clock as she went. Were the men at the top fixing the chimes? Oh, it'd be good to have them back. Helps check the hours while you work. Her phone beeped. Tina, her daughter, had forgotten her sandwiches and gone back home to find Nan had eaten them, plus her crisps and chocolate. What should she do? She had drama after school, and she needed food. Hilary could have wept. Tina was the youngest, called Tiny by her brothers, who often teased her. Protective of Tina, Hilary found it hard to let her join in things at school because she had one leg shorter than the other, making her limp. Drama group was a breakthrough. At her front door she could hear the telly booming out. Gran was deaf too. Hilary took a deep breath and entered the house. Half an hour later, rushing back to work, not having eaten herself, she had spent 20 minutes trying to contact the doctor's surgery to make another appointment for her mother. At the Guildhall, she felt the lions frowning down as she hurried up the steps. The men were still on the clock face. Their scaffolding blocked the face. She felt bereft by the loss of the familiar sight. Seconds still ticked by, even if the clock had stopped. Hilary's husband, Richard, worked at the university in the chemistry department. He started as a technician with a degree in organic chemistry, and through hard work and encouragement, he'd gained a PhD. He was now Dr. Hours. He spent his time lecturing and researching his own obscure compounds. One day he would find the answer to the world's fuel problems. He was contracted to work less than Hilary, but his research kept him working longer hours. When Hilary asked for support in family matters, he reminded her how long he'd studied, how hard he worked, and that one day... Hilary never seemed able to remind him that all through having children, her problems looking after both their mothers, she had worked and supported them, being the only earner in the early days. Her work was not going to save the world. Although, to be honest, it sometimes did feel as if her department kept Portsmouth ticking over.
At Debenhams, Connor plunged ahead into the darkness of the tunnel. Years of watching Doctor Who had conditioned him to this exciting scenario. He'd probably encounter a well-horrible monster with slimy and gruesome tendencies to destroy the world, or at least Portsmouth. Poor Pretty stood there, unsure what to do. Her sensible side said not to follow him into the unknown tunnel. She should remember her duty, go back to the shop floor and report to the manager. What would happen to her coveted Employee of the Month award? But her more daring alter ego urged her to go after him. He might need her help. How could she abandon him to his fate? Saying goodbye to the award, she gingerly stepped into the passageway. She could see a faint flickering light. Connor's lighter. She started to follow it, stepping very carefully. This tunnel was gravelly underfoot and rocky-walled. Suddenly there was a rush of air, accompanied by the sound of pattering feet and the feel of hairy body against her legs. She screamed and lost her footing. It jumped up at her face and tried to eat her. She was about to die. Two things happened almost at the same time. Connor appeared in front of her to save her from the alien, and the monster changed into a little fluffy dog who wanted to be her friend.
What a letdown. It's only a silly little doggy. Could have been a pit bull at least.
Thank goodness it wasn't. But what on earth is it doing down here?
She stroked its ears. The dog responded by enthusiastically licking her hand. Then it picked up a ball of gold thread it had brought through the tunnel, wanting to play. Another noise filled the air. It was getting busy down there. Someone was calling out. They had come into the tunnel and were following them. As one, the boy, girl and dog fled. As they ran, they looked back at the faint light of a torch and sound of muffled shouting. They kept on running, tripping now and then. The dog, however, kept a firm paw hold and ran in front, showing the way, it seemed.
It's like being in Scooby-Doo. Maybe we're going to find some treasure.
Just as Pretty felt she couldn't carry on, what with the endless running, the cold, wet walls, and the terrifying claustrophobic tunnel itself, a lightness began to emerge. Slowing down, they found that the exit was in sight, a grate above their heads. Luckily, Connor was agile and quick-thinking, as you had to be if your occupation was a pickpocket. The only snag was that Pretty had to bend down so he could climb onto her back to reach the grate. She did this with a bad grace. It was hardly dignified, after all. With much scrambling and digging in of shoes, he got up and, standing on tiptoe, tried to push the grate up. Nothing doing. It did not budge an inch. It was old and rusty and had obviously not been moved for years.
We need a crowbar or something. This bugger ain't going to move for nothing.
Pretty thought about having to go back through that dreadful tunnel. She couldn't do it. Her heart thumped and her hands turned to sweat. She thought about her dad, her mum. She prayed.
Get us out of here. Rescue us, please.
She thought of the stick that she was now holding. She looked at it and read the rich golden words again.
Virtue shows quite as well in rags and patches as she does in purple and fine linen.
She felt strength of the words. Virtue meant goodness, she knew that. And she felt that ragged little Connor had that quality, and she wanted to have that quality herself. So together they may have more power than it would appear. Plus the little dog, of course. She passed the stick up to Connor, who raised his eyebrows in surprise.
Suppose it might do the trick. I hope it don't break, though.
It did the job, and yes, it cracked under pressure, but it had helped free them, all of them, the boy, the girl, the dog, and the woman. She had caught up with them and stood there, panting like a dog herself.
Oh my little Jip! Oh, you are safe! Oh, come to Mummy!
With a torn skirt and one shoe missing, it was the posh lady from Debenhams. Then another woman, one of the gorilla knitters. Give me back my golden thread, she yelled at Jip. Connor dived out of the exit and into the middle of a crowd of interested onlookers. He was in the tunnel that went into Victoria Park. Up ahead, he spotted a group of people. He knew those faces.
Oi, Shane! Wait for me, you dinlow!
There was to be a concert at St George's Hall to celebrate Dickens. Music, readings and drama performed by local artists. Painting was needed to make the place equal to the occasion. It had become a bit shabby of late. Fred Weeks, the contracted painter, encouraged local young men by giving them work experience. His nephew, Mark Hours, had recently started working with him. Fred hoped that by employing Mark it would help his sister Hilary to stop worrying about her son's future. Fred opened the door of the hall and glanced up at the Spinnaker Tower in the fading daylight. Its blue and red lights had started to glow over the city. He had been against the idea of the tower at first and quite angry at the soaring costs. But now he got used to it. Indeed, he liked it. It made Portsmouth quite unique. Fred saw something glinting along the path. He went closer. A pair of white leather gloves. The glinting came from gold embroidery on the gloves, spelling out a quotation. The whole difference between construction and creation is exactly this, that a thing constructed can only be loved after it is constructed, but a thing created is loved before it exists. Said Fred. trying them on for size.
Dr. Hour's research had gone badly wrong. He opened the container to look at his results and found 2 charred objects. What? Overcooked jacket potatoes. His mobile jangled. Hilary. Come to Victoria Park. Everyone's going. Instead of telling her, as he usually did, he wasn't everyone and that he was busy, he decided to humour her. Taking his potatoes with him to find all of Portsmouth did seem to be heading in the same way, many of them clutching old clothing and boots.
Stella aimed the pushchair like a bulldozer through the shoppers at Commercial Road. The elderly gent was heading towards the Guildhall. Terry was fed up. All he wanted was a smoke, and he was lucky a trip to the pub. Do we have to do this? He looked at Harry's face, beaming, as if he was being flung around a fairground ride.
Ma'am, you got the golden vest?
Shane was not about to be left out of the fun. You haven't. You ain't gone and brung it with you? Terry's eyes rolled. What are you up to, Stell? Stella had a mission. The man carrying the carpet bag waited at the crossing for the green man. Stella stopped abruptly and held out her arm to stop Terry from passing her and the children.
What do you think he's up to?
She could not take her eyes off him.
Something's happening.
He moved as the crossing sounded. Stella revved the buggy. As the prey and the hunting party entered the Guildhall Square, Terry was really getting bored. He could see the pub across the square. Look, I don't know what I think you're up to. You sort it out and meet me over there.
Natal, move it quick, I don't want to lose him.
Terry did as he was bid. The elderly man was not going to the Guildhall, but walked through the railway tunnel to Victoria Park. As he got to the first patch of grass, Cliff Garrett looked over his shoulder. He obviously did not recognise the family. As he walked, he was aiming in a definite direction over the grass, not even using footpaths. Stella and Terry and the buggy followed. Now they were getting closer, a bit too close. Stella got her phone out. She had to tell someone what was going on. Terry, on the other hand, decided to roll a cigarette. A voice boomed out.
Oi, Shane, wait for me, you dinlow.
They plunged straight into the legs of the crooked old man.
Meanwhile, the men in the clock tower thought they'd found what had stopped the clock, and they were now working on the chimes. An old neck scarf had been jammed in the clockwork. Oh, get rid of that, Jerome. The scarf drifted down the square, landing not on the ground but on a woman's head. Whoops! He ducked out of sight. The rag slowly settled on Hilary's head, blinding her. Pulling it off, she saw the quotation. No one is useless in this world who lightens the burdens of another. She wrapped the scarf around her neck. It suited her. Hurrying through the crowds towards Victoria Park, she saw her sons, Mark and Tom, and her brother Fred, and then her sister Davina, holding hands with a man, all with bundles of their own. Oh, she wished Tina was there, and suddenly she saw her. She spotted Richard at the same moment. He, in an uncharacteristic movement, swung Tina off the ground and onto his shoulders, and as a family, they walked into the excitement of the park.
Curly Ash, the last rag and bone man in Portsmouth. His boys had been delivering bills all over the city for weeks, and people who had collected together their unwanted clothing had begun to congregate in Victoria Park. Cliff Garrett was intrigued by such a spectacle. Heart in mouth and carpet bag firmly in hand, he slipped through the park gates, and there, centre stage, was a rostrum on which was placed what one could only describe as a throne. Seated thereupon was a portly gentleman in rolled-up shirt sleeves, bedecked with an ostentatious array of gold jewellery and flanked by 2 burly lads. Cliff approached, bearing witness to a strange set of events. Members of the crowd would proffer items of clothing to said Mr. Ash, which he would inspect. Clothes with normal shop slogans: "Beer is the reason I get up every afternoon," "Pregnant not fat," "Save water, don't wash," "I only look innocent," "Sex and drugs and sausage rolls," "I Facebooked your mum," etc., would be passed over to Pearl Stitch and her team of guerrilla knitters, who would work furiously around them. The clothes emblazoned with Dickens' words of wisdom, however, he would pass on to his 2 boys, which were then placed in a large basket between them. But first, one of the lads would scribble something down in a large jotter. Cliff Garrett inched closer. Behind him, he heard a familiar voice. "The woman with the golden vest." He turned towards her and seemed to blunder into her buggy. "Bloody hell, what is it with you? Do you have to kick my kid's buggy every time you sees us? Tell him, Terry." Terry looked up from his studious task of rolling a cigarette. His bulk, stance and Union Jack t-shirt gave him the appearance of a bulldog.
What's up with you, Mush? How would you like if I kicked you? You want to see how it feels?
Terry pushed forward like a pugilist at a prize fight. Clutching his carpet bag, Garrett scurried away. He tripped and landed at the feet of Mr. Ash's young scribe. "You okay, mister?"
Perfect. I love falling over and landing in the dirt.
"Have a seat." The boy patted the corner of the rostrum. "Can I get you some water or something?" A stroke of luck. If he were distracted, then Garrett might be able to glimpse the jotter.
Thank you, yes.
He forced a crocodile smile.
I do feel a little overcome.
The lad excused himself. Garrett looked around to ensure that he wasn't being watched, patted the vest he'd secreted under the armpit of his jacket when he'd bumped into the buggy, and picked up the jotter.
Meanwhile, at the John Pounds Memorial Church, a volunteer was astonished to notice an absence in the reproduction of John Pounds' workshop. The figure of John Pounds himself had disappeared. "But that's impossible," she thought to herself, gazing through the window at the space where the John Pounds model should have been standing. It was impossible, because the door to the workshop remained locked. Nobody would have been able to get in or out, least of all carrying a full-scale model of the great man himself.
A breeze wafted through Victoria Park. Occasionally a cloud created a further welcome relief from the hot summer sun. Curly Ash, stately as ever, relaxed in his chair. In the distance, caged birds delivered a serene compliment to the whole occasion. People were milling around, but no one spoke. Pearl Stitch dragged a life-sized rag doll onto the rostrum. "There you go, Mr. Ash, as per instructions. We did as you asked and stuffed it using the clothes with silly slogans. Hope it suits." Pearl had no idea why her guerrilla knitters had been asked to create this creature, but was sure Curly knew what he was about. He always did. "Perfect, darling, absolutely perfect, ain't it, boys?" Aaron Cable held out his arms and proffered a gold shirt that glistened in the sunshine. Curly smiled, stood up and accepted the shirt before handing it to his right-hand guerrilla. At that moment, the overgrown entrance to the park's long disused air raid shelter spewed forth the party from Debenhams. Firstly Connor, holding tightly onto the still apprehensive Preeti, swiftly followed by Jip, teeth still firmly clamped around his golden prize. Then a guerrilla knitter shouting, "Stop, thief!" And finally a distraught Dora, fearing for the safety of her pampered pooch. Bleed now, tell what the ruddy heck is our Connor doing there? Connor Dawkins, get your ass over here! What the hell are you playing at with that stick? You ain't mugged no one, have you? Stella's dulcet tones could be heard in Buckland.
Blimey, quick, Petty, we have to leg it. Me Aunt Stell's on me case.
Connor, you should respect your auntie.
You're joking. Look at the silly cow.
Pretty had to admit, albeit silently, that Stella's demeanour commanded little respect, but nonetheless urged Connor to speak nicely to his elders. Meanwhile, further back in the retinue, Dora was experiencing severe palpitations. She had spotted the erstwhile love of her life, a certain Clifford Roger Albert Garrett, perched on the corner of the rostrum.
Oh, Jippy. Oh, do come to Mummy. She needs to talk to you. Mummy is having one of her turns. Oh, Jippy, help Mummy before she faints.
Jip, clearly understanding every word Mummy said, dropped his new toy and leapt into Dora's arms. Our heroic knitter snatched up the golden thread and ran towards her comrades, holding the ball up triumphantly as though it were the Olympic flame itself. Can we get this over with, please? Mother will be wondering where we are, and she'll want her tea, Hilary hissed. Hang on a tick. Tom put a comforting arm around her shoulders. She'll be okay for a while. I just need to deal with something. Tom released Hilary and strode towards the Debenhams party. Connor Dawkins, it's you. Now look here, lad, I will not have you continually attempting to make a monkey of me by either non-attendance or, when you do choose to grace us with your presence, severe disruption of my classes. Connor stared defiantly at Tom, offering him 2 fingers as a response. Pretty, horrified, grasped Connor's upheld hand.
How can you be so rude? I believed you were a nice boy.
Connor swore, wriggled from her grasp and ran to Stella for comfort. Stella slapped the boy hard and proceeded to instruct him in the art of good manners.
Last items, please, ladies and gentlemen,
bellowed Curly. Cliff Garrett stood back and watched as the Weeks and Hours family delivered a hat, breeches, scarf, gloves and topcoat with Richard's failed experiment secreted in its pockets.
Carpe diem. Now is the time.
Garrett rooted through the contents of his carpet bag and produced a waistcoat and leather apron.
How much?
He barked at Curly. Curly's face changed. He held up one hand, clicked his fingers and gestured towards Garrett. In an instant his boys grabbed Cliff's swag, placing it in the overflowing basket.
I don't deal with thieves,
Curly chuckled. Named and shamed, Cliff felt the eyes of the city upon him.
I admit, I'm a terrible man. I've always been, ever since the day I... Oh.
Did you see that? Stella stood open-mouthed. Come on, it's us, sir. The buggy revved once more, trundled towards Cliff. You got sight of ours.
Have it! Have it! My thieving days are over.
Shane twirled the golden vest excitedly around his head.
Go on, Shane, hand it over.
Terry motioned the child to go forward. Want this, mister? Shane's grubby hands held out the gold-embroidered vest, which Curly accepted with grace and patted Shane on the head.
Well done, lad. You'll go far.
And me, Mr. Ash, and me.
Connor ran towards the rostrum, brandishing his cane.
Thank you, lads. This is what I was waiting for, the finishing touch to me Victorian gent. There you go. Don't he look grand?
The cloth mannequin, now bedecked in embroidered clothing and sporting a fine cane, was the very image of John Pounds. The park became eerily silent. No traffic sounds could be heard. Even the birds stopped singing. A low hum emanated from the figure as it began to glow. At first a deep red, changing in pulses to orange. The hum intensified. Orange melted to yellow, and eventually to pure gold. Everyone stared, their faces feeling an intense heat. Curly rose and pointed to Cliff. The boys guided him to the golden figure, whereupon a deep sense of tranquillity swept over him. Pulses of light reached out further and further until one touched Cliff. He smiled, took a deep breath, and sighed. As he looked down, he realised that he too was wearing what appeared to be the apparel of John Pounds. He slid his hands over the golden shirt, admiring the intricate workmanship. Finally, Cliff Garrett knew peace. The spirit of John Pounds, the words of Charles Dickens, Cliff wore it well. Again, Curly pointed, this time toward Terry, who was approaching the rostrum in a trance-like state. Cliff said gently,
"Hello, Terry. Don't be afraid."
More pulses of light reached out, enveloping Terry. He felt different, no longer angry and bitter. His mind was relaxed. He was euphoric.
How do you feel, Terry? I don't know. I ain't me anymore. Look at yourself, Terry.
Terry looked down. He was also wearing John Pounds' clothes. Cliff and Terry turned to face the onlookers. Each and every one of them was wearing the same clothes. Every face was smiling. Slowly, the light shimmered from white to yellow to orange, and then to a dazzling gold.
"It's time!"
declared Curly. The cloth mannequin's garments began to drip. Streaks of liquid clothing ran down the figure, forming a golden pool that bubbled and emitted a vapour which ascended high above the park. Golden words formed across the sky. The Guildhall's bells began to chime once more. In each and everyone's hand appeared a warming baked potato, a parting gift from the spirit of John Pounds himself. And the golden words in the sky? They were a gift from Dickens himself.
The sun, the bright sun, brings back not light alone, but new life and hope and freshness to man, bursting upon the crowded city in clear and radiant glory, through cathedral dome and rotten crevice, it sheds its equal ray.
"Heaven's light our guide," Curly Ash repeated the city's motto, patted his boys on the back and said, "I think we're done here." Poof, he was gone.
People started to move around once more, this time chatting pleasantly to their neighbours, exchanging further quotes from Dickens that they read from their clothing. "You know, Richard," said Hilary, taking her husband's arm, "I think perhaps we should start looking for a nursing home for Mother." "You're right, darling, especially since I have just this minute received a text informing me that I have been awarded a research grant to work on my fuel project, which means that we can afford for you to work part-time. You can have some time for yourself, at last."
Pretty knew that it was time to open the envelope she had been carrying around all day. She had to face it, good or bad. Her face lit up as she read the letter. "Dear Miss Patel, due to your outstanding service and devotion to duty, I am pleased to inform you of our decision to make you Debenham's Employee of the Month. With that, we would like to offer you the position of Senior Sales Assistant. Please call in the office at 9 a.m. on Monday to receive your award and inform us whether or not you wish to take up this position. Congratulations, Dick Johnston, Area Manager."
Thing is, Mr. Howers, I can't read, can I? That's why there's no point in being in school. But if you was to learn me after school, then I could be like all the clever kids. Go on, what do you say?
"I would be delighted, Mr. Dawkins. Delighted. Here, Stell, fancy a takeaway tonight? I think we can afford it if I take up Mr. Evans' offer on that labouring job. Might even have enough to think about trying for a sister for these two. What do you reckon?"
Oh, Terry, I'll see if Mum will have the kids tonight. Knows what I means?
Clifford, it's you, isn't it?
Yes, my dear. How can you ever forgive me for the wretched way I treated you?
Oh, I forgave you long ago. I still love you, Clifford, even now. I never stopped.
Dora, Dora, oh, how I regret not turning up on our wedding day. Perhaps if you might, oh, Dora, dearest Dora, marry me.
Be quiet, Jip. Mummy doesn't need your advice this time.